Reform is changing our policy on the two-child cap for universal credit. The policy was well-meaning. We want to help British working families to have more children. But right now, we just can't afford to do so with welfare. I give you my word that a Reform government will never play fast and loose with your savings. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Nigel. It's very good to be here. Now, look, I read in the papers this morning a commentator saying that they thought that I'd been appointed Reform's shadow chancellor because I had experience sat around the cabinet table. And of course, there's truth in that. I sat around the cabinet table and I saw up close what government gets right and what it gets wrong. And that is going to be important if Reform forms the next government of this country. But the table that I sat around that was actually the most formative to me was not the one in Downing Street. It was the one at home with my mum and dad in Wolverhampton in the 1980s. It was growing up there that I saw my dad, Bill, who you just watched in that video, a man who was not born into a life of privilege, a Manchester lad. He moved to the Black Country to take up a job in a foundry. He'd left school at 16. He went to night school. He got some qualifications. And around that kitchen table, he set up a business. He started it there and with a white van on our drive. And it wasn't easy, as anyone who set up a business is a sole trader, has gone it alone knows. But just like all of those people who've done that and are doing that right now across our country, through sheer grit and determination, he built that business. In time, he set up a shop, and then he had his own factory. He was able to build a more comfortable life for my mum, my sister, and me than he had ever been able to imagine when he was growing up. In building his business, he provided hundreds of jobs, good jobs, secure jobs, the kind that offered families peace of mind, the chance to get on in life. But for too many people right now, across our country, those opportunities are fading. They're victims of a 30-year-long economic consensus which has failed, and mismanagement by a Westminster class who bet that just because Britain was a rich and powerful country, it always would be. They were wrong. In 1997, people's living standards in our country were closing the gap with America. Today, incomes are closer to Romania's than to those of the United States. And why is that? They spent money we didn't have, more than doubled our debt. They increased taxes to record levels. They failed to reform the public sector, where productivity has barely moved in 30 years. They blindly pursued net zero, driving industrial electricity prices to the highest level in the developed world and killing British manufacturing in the process, of the kind that I knew when I grew up in the West Midlands. They eviscerated the tax base. Today we have just 80,000 companies with a turnover of £5 million or more. That's a quarter fewer per capita than there are in the United States. The recent succession of prime ministers in my old party and now in Labour lacked the vision for what we could do to arrest our national decline. They were defeatist, and each in turn, they were defeated. The financial crash should have been a big wake-up call, the warning to address the profound structural weaknesses in our economy. The economic shock of COVID might have been another one. Build back better, we were told. Well, they were both missed. And it now falls to reform, to fix Britain with a new economic model. Now, at this stage, I understand you will be wary of false prophets. Many prospective chancellors have offered their diagnoses of the problems facing our country. They've even alighted on some of the same remedies in speeches much like this one. Before the election, I bet some of you in this room went to listen to Rachel Reeves. She pledged financial stability and investment. She said she would unleash the potential of British workers. And to a weary public, it sounded promising. The reality? Instead of offering stability, she's unleashed chaos. Benefit cuts in, benefit cuts out. Inheritance tax up, inheritance tax down. Almost every possible tax rise on a business or a worker floated in the pages of a national newspaper for week after week after week, with devastating impact on business confidence. A cabinet that is now at war, and a prime minister on the brink. What happened to the promised investment boom? It was driven overseas with punitive measures against investors, which in the case of non-doms could see the country actually lose money. Any juice left in businesses has been squeezed out by tens of billions in tax rises, all to pay for an exploding benefits bill. And what about those workers who Rachel Reeves promised to champion? They've been taxed more, and everyone in Britain, like the country itself, is poorer for it. Prices rising, unemployment up because of her destructive tax on jobs, especially amongst the young. Everyone feeling hard up. An economy no longer serving working people, held hostage by a trade union orthodoxy that we all thought we'd banished decades ago. As one of Keir Starmer's own cabinet ministers, Wes Streeting, said to his friend Peter Mandelson, "There's no growth strategy at all." The British people have been betrayed once again. They voted for change, and instead they just got more decline. They feel cheated, and they have every right to be. What Britain needs is to change course and to forge a new political economy. What Britain needs is reform. So our benefit system is broken. That's not fair, that's not right, and it is an economic and a moral disaster. That's why I commit to you today that if we win the next election, reform will defuse the benefits bomb that is set to bankrupt Britain. We are developing the most comprehensive plan for welfare reform in British politics. Better, more serious, more rigorous than any other of the parties. And we will be setting that out in the months ahead. We will stop those with mild anxiety, depression, and similar conditions from claiming disability benefits, and instead do everything we can to encourage them into the dignity of work. We will reinstate in-person assessments and require clinical diagnosis to weed out those who are choosing a life on benefits. We will end the abuse of the Motability Scheme, where expensive cars are handed out for conditions like tennis elbow and paid for by working people who could never afford those same cars themselves. And we will make sure that only British nationals can claim benefits in the first place. But we need to go further, because at the moment, the system is not fair to those who pay for it. As a signal of intent today, Reform is changing our policy on the two-child cap for universal credit. The policy was well-meaning. We want to help British working families to have more children. But right now, we just can't afford to do so with welfare. So it has to go. As Reform's Shadow Chancellor, I'm ending it. A Reform government will restore the cap in full. We are the party of alarm clock Britain. We are a party of workers and not welfare. We will never make promises we can't keep to the British people. So we'll only cut taxes when we have generated the fiscal headroom necessary to make those tax cuts sustainable. And to those who question our approach, let me say this. We have seen what happens when this economic rule is ignored and fiscal discipline is thrown out of the window. Liz Truss went down the path of wild spending splurges alongside big tax cuts. The result was chaos. Mortgage payments soared, working people suffered. Today, I give you my word that a reform government will never play fast and loose with your savings.